and welcome everyone to Welfare Wednesdays. I'm Ren and I'm your Animal Education and Research Executive at UBC Pod this year, and I'm also your host for this year's Welfare Wednesdays. So for today's segment, we have a very, very exciting guest, Peter Singer. Peter is an influential moral philosopher known for his utilitarian approach to applied bioethics. He's the IRW DeCamp Professor of Bioethics at Princeton University and Laureate Professor at the University of Melbourne. One of his most widely recognized works is Animal Liberation, first written in 1975, and this book has jump-started the conversation around animal ethics and has popularized the term speciesism. Other works of his that you may have heard about are The Life You Can Save and Famine, Affluence, and Morality, which promote altruism, and these also call for people to do the most good that they can with what they have. Throughout his work, he has encouraged sentient beings to incorporate practical actions into their life to diminish suffering and improve the world. As a result, he was recognized as the Australian Humanist of the Year by the Council of Australian Humanist Societies in 2004. Peter Singer, welcome to Welfare Wednesdays.
Thank you, and it's good to be with you.
Thank you. So, one of your most famous works is Animal Liberation, which was first written in 1975. And one of the key ideas that was presented in this book was the concept of speciesism. Can you summarize what this is and why you think it's a central moral issue?
Certainly, we're all familiar with racism and sexism, and I think people reject those. Most people, I'm sure, listening to this will think racism is a bad thing. So, what is racism? Well, it's the attitude in its most blatant form. It's the attitude of a dominant race to the view that the interests of people of another race don't count as much as their interests do. And obviously, in its most extreme forms, it means that those of the other race can be enslaved, can be tools to serve the purposes of the dominant race. And we saw that with the European enslavement of Africans and the horrendously cruel slave trade and the treatment of slaves when they arrived as well. So think about our species and its relation to non-human animals. And you see something similar. Now, I'm not saying that it's parallel in all ways, of course. I'm not saying that animals and Africans are close or anything like that. That would be a horrendous thing to say. But there is a dominant group, a powerful group, and it thinks that it's the only group that matters, and it discounts or often completely disregards the interests of other sentient beings, beings who have lives, who are conscious, who can feel pain, or whose lives can go well or badly. It disregards their interests and thinks that, we're the ones who matter, we're the only ones who have rights. We talk a lot about human rights, but we don't accept the idea that animals have rights, certainly not in law. And we think we can use them. So, we can ship them around the world if we want to, but we can imprison them in factory farms where tens or even hundreds of billions of animals are raised each year in vast numbers with no regard for their interests or welfare. They're just products, they're just commodities. We do whatever is necessary to produce those commodities as cheaply as possible. And if many of them die on the way or suffer, well, that doesn't matter unless becomes a commercial problem and threatens the commercial viability of the enterprise. But there can be a vast amount of suffering that doesn't threaten that. So that's what speciesism is, and it's a moral issue because there's no justification for disregarding the interests of any sentient being. Pain is pain, and if pain is a bad thing when it occurs in a human, then if a similar amount, a similar type of pain occurs in a non-human animal, it's a bad thing too.
Yes. And I know you're a big proponent of choosing more plant-based options, choosing to go, I think, vegetarian. And given that these like vegan lifestyle or vegan options are usually more expensive and more inconvenient, what are some reasons people should choose these vegan options, even if it's more expensive or difficult? And additionally, like some individuals they might have food allergies, such as an allergy to a legume, which is a vital protein source. What are some practical steps that they could take to reduce animal suffering in their lives?
Well, firstly, let me say I don't accept that it's more expensive to be vegan. Some of the highly processed products that you buy in supermarkets are certainly more expensive. But, I've been vegetarian and vegan before there were these products. There is nothing cheaper really than to make, for example, a lentil curry, a dal, which is something that you know, Indians have been eating for millennia. It's basically you buy your lentils in bulk. You can buy, you know, lentils are very cheap. They're a high protein food. You cook them with various spices and curry powder and so on. And you serve it over rice, and you have a balanced high protein meal that is tasty as well. It's less expensive than buying beef, certainly. It's a very inexpensive meal. So I don't accept that it's more expensive to be vegan at all. I think it's actually less. Um, Food allergies, well, if there are people who have food allergies to legumes, that may be an issue. They may need to find other sources of protein. There are other vegan sources of protein. So that's something more careful. If people really feel that it's just too much to be vegan, I suggest they find a source of eggs from hens who are genuinely free range. That is, try to find a farm where hens are outside on grass during the daytime, and that's it's not ideal, but it's not vegan, but it's a better form of welfare than you get from any factory farmed products. So, and you will pay more for those eggs, admittedly, but you don't need to eat that many of them. So there's lots of other sources of protein as well, I think, that people can get. So I think most people can manage certainly to avoid the factory farm products. And if they can't, well, they can volunteer for organizations that are trying to stop factory farming. Uh, there's lots of things that you can do that will help to spread the ideas of factory farming being wrong.
Yes, and with that, have you seen any like changes in policy or in individual people that has made a difference to the lives of animals? Like
Oh,
have you?
absolutely. Yeah, if you go back for the 50 years that animal liberation has been had, um, yes, many countries have improved their regulations. And I stress improved, not they're still not as good as they should be, but the entire European Union has standards for the welfare of farmed animals that greatly exceed those in the United States, and it's quite distressing how badly the United States um, lags behind the European Union, and Canada too is lagging behind the European Union. So, for example, the battery cages for hens um, are prohibited in the entire European Union. Uh, the only cages you're allowed to have are much larger ones, and they have to have a nesting box where hens can lay their eggs in a sheltered spot. Uh, the individual veal stalls are prohibited in the European Union. Individual sow stalls for the breeding sows are prohibited. So those reforms have improved the lives of hundreds of millions of animals. So yes, you can definitely make a difference. And and again, in the United States, there is a movement that is getting hens out of those standard cages. Unfortunately, it's still not succeeded. I think at least half of the US hens are still in those very small wire cages. And I'm not sure where Canada is on that one. I know Australia is also lagging quite badly behind. So there's a lot of progress to be made, but yes, the work of animal organizations and people concerned about animals has definitely made a difference.
Yes. Would you, for a future that practices like the principles of animal liberation where they're and where it's widely accepted, would you see it like as we're not factory farming anymore? Would you see that entire like kind of unit go away?
I would like to see that happen. I don't expect to see it in my own lifetime. Maybe it'll happen in your lifetime. Um, that would be great. Yeah, I think it's an abomination. I think future generations will look back on the way we treat animals in factory farms today, much as we look back on the slave trade, and they will say, well, how could people who seem in other respects to be decent have accepted such a treatment of vast numbers of sentient beings? Um, it's it's a huge sort of blot on our moral record as a civilization that we do that.
What is your opinion on the factory farming? Because it's and by that I mean the global population is expected to increase by about 2 billion people in the next 30 years. I understand the intensification process in factory farming is meant to kind of help alleviate that global hunger issue that we're going to have.
No, I don't think it's meant to do that at all. It's simply meant to make profits for people in affluent countries. Um, it's a very inefficient way of producing food because when we confine animals indoors, we have to grow food somewhere else and transport it to them. And the animals use most of the nutritional value of that food just to keep their bodies warm, because we're talking about birds and mammals. They have to keep their bodies warm, not so much fish, I suppose. And they develop parts of their bodies that we don't eat. They use the nutritional value of the food for that, bones, for example. So if you look at all the figures, it's highly inefficient. We get back when we feed grain to beef cattle, for example, we get back no more than about 10% of the food value. When we feed it to pigs, we get back something more. Maybe it's more like 20 to 30%. When we feed it to chickens, it's a little bit around 30 to 40% maybe, but we never get back the majority of the food value. So if we want to feed a rising population, we should not be feeding hundreds of millions of tons of grain and soy to animals.
It's more effective to switch to a plant-based diet then.
Yes, so even if it's not completely plant-based, to a diet that doesn't have so much animal products, then, factory farming serves more affluent countries in particular. Uh,
Mhm.
um, China has increased the amount of factory farming as its population has become more affluent. Um, with countries that are really poor, poor people don't buy factory farm products. They usually can't afford them. They're much more likely, as I said, people in poverty in rural India are likely to eat lentils rather than animal products. People in Africa are likely to eat a variety of, depending where in Africa, a variety of plant grains. Now, the, you know, that's not as good as lentils because it doesn't have as much protein. So you do need some sources of protein, but the amount of protein that people eat in affluent countries is the amount of animal products, I should say, is is not at all good for their health. There's plenty of evidence that it actually is more likely to cause heart disease and cancers of the digestive system. So if we want to live long and healthy lives and feed a growing world population, then we certainly don't want to grow food and feed it to animals.
Mm. And in a different stance, for people that own pets, because pet ownership is very common nowadays and people obviously adore their pets, I wanted to know your stance on this because I feel like it can come from a place of superiority. Would this go against your principle of equal consideration of others because it's coming from like a top-down perspective or not?
For me, it doesn't. It's not so much what perspective it comes from. It's rather how is the animal treated and how seriously do we take the interests of the animal. So people who live with a companion animal as a member of their family and treat the interests of that animal seriously, uh, I don't really have a problem with that from an animal welfare point of view. And very often, in fact, it leads people to think about the animals they're eating as well, because this is one of the huge paradoxes that if you say to people, um, you know, what would you think if we locked up your dog in a big shed where it couldn't really even move or run around, that it was with thousands of other dogs, strangers that it could not socially adjust to, and then when it got fat, we take it out, we throw it into a truck and hang it upside down by its legs and slaughter it, cut its throat. Maybe it's pre-stunned, maybe it's not. People would be horrified by that. But of course, that's done to cows and pigs and chickens, and especially if you compare pigs, say, with dogs, there's no real difference in the intelligence of the beings or the kinds of lives that they would live if you allowed them to live decent lives. So I think if people think about that and they think about their companion animals and then they think, hey, but I'm eating an animal that is very similar to my companion animal and has been treated completely differently, should I really be doing that? That's a powerful reason for change.
Well, thank you so much for joining me here today, Peter. And thank you so much, guys, for listening to our conversation. I hope you guys enjoyed that as much as I did. And I also hope you guys learned a little bit more about the philosophy aspect of animal welfare, you could say, or just animal rights movements in general.